What is the price of a single word? For most, it's nothing. But for billionaire CEO Marco Bellamy, one word, spat with venom at a seemingly powerless waitress, cost him everything. This isn't just a story about a bad day or a lost temper. It's the story of how a $3 billion empire, built on steel and intimidation, was shattered in a single moment by a quiet act of disrespect. It's a story of hidden identities, corporate espionage, and the devastating truth that the person you dismiss as worthless might just be the one holding all the cards. Prepare yourself, because the fall from the top is faster and more brutal than you can ever imagine. Marco Bellamy didn't walk into rooms, he conquered them. Space seemed to bend around his 6'3" frame, the air crackling with the static electricity of his ambition. His suit, a custom-tailored Tom Ford in a shade of charcoal so dark it was almost a void, was less an article of clothing and more a declaration of war on mediocrity. At 42, Marco was the founder and CEO of Bellamy Industries, a sprawling global conglomerate that had its iron fists in everything from aerospace engineering to private military contracts. He was a titan, a predator at the apex of the corporate food chain, and he hadn't gotten there by being kind. Today was the culmination of a 6-month hunt. The prey, Ethereum. Ethereum wasn't just a company. It was a revolution packaged in silicon and light, founded by the enigmatic and notoriously reclusive Dr. Aris Thorne, a ghost in the machine who hadn't been seen publicly in nearly a decade. Ethereum had developed a proprietary quantum computing core that was poised to make every other form of data processing on the planet obsolete. It was the Holy Grail, and Marco was about to drink from it. The price tag was a staggering $3 billion, a figure that would make even other billionaires balk. For Marco, it was a bargain. The man who controlled Ethereum would control the future. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. Its patrons were the architects of the modern world, heads of state, banking scions, and men like Marco. The interior was a hushed cathedral of wealth, with dark mahogany walls, floors of polished Italian marble, and lighting so artfully dimmed it made everyone look like a conspirator in a masterpiece painting. Marco arrived at 1:45. Punctuality was for employees. Arriving early was a power play, a way of claiming territory. He was shown to the best table, a secluded booth in the corner with a panoramic view of the city skyline, a kingdom he already considered his. He was meeting Kenji Tanaka, the executive chairman of the holding firm that represented Ethereum's board, and, more importantly, the interests of the invisible Dr. Thorne. Tanaka was old-school Japanese business royalty, a man for whom honor, respect, and character were not quaint ideals but the very bedrock of commerce. Marco knew this, and he had prepared his performance accordingly. He would be deferential, charming, and keenly intelligent. He would play the part of a worthy successor to Thorne's legacy. It was a role he despised, but could execute with flawless precision. As he settled into the plush leather of the booth, a young woman approached. "Good afternoon, sir. May I get you something to drink while you wait? Some of our sparkling water, perhaps?" Marco didn't look up from his phone, where he was gutting a subordinate via a curt email. He waved a dismissive hand. "Just water. Still, no ice." "Of course, sir." The voice was soft, with a clear, almost melodic timbre that snagged for a microsecond on the edge of his consciousness before he discarded it as irrelevant data. He heard the quiet clink of a glass being placed on the table, the gentle splash of water. When he finally glanced up, it was only to survey the room again, his gaze sweeping past the waitress as if she were a piece of furniture. Her name was Tiana Moore. She was 26, though the quiet stress in her eyes could have added another decade. To the patrons of Aurelia, she was just another cog in the silent, efficient machinery of elite service. She was meant to be invisible, her movements fluid and unobtrusive, her presence registered only by a freshly filled glass or a cleared plate. But Tiana was not invisible, not to herself. Every shift at Aurelia was an exercise in anthropological observation. She saw the fragile egos behind the billion-dollar bluster, the desperate loneliness in the eyes of men who owned islands, the subtle tells of a lie or a hidden agenda in the flick of a wrist or the clenching of a jaw. She had a mind that saw patterns others missed, a quiet brilliance that was currently being used to calculate the precise angle at which to pour water to avoid splashing a guest's Patek Philippe. She saw Marco Bellamy and recognized the species immediately. The silverback gorilla, dominant and dangerously insecure, his aggression a shield for a profound emptiness. She had served dozens like him. They were all sharp angles, loud watches, and eyes that never truly saw the person standing in front of them. When Kenji Tanaka arrived, it was like a shift in the restaurant's gravitational field. He was a small, immaculate man in his late 70s with a gentle stoop and a face etched with the wisdom of 1,000 boardrooms. He moved with a deliberate calm that was a stark contrast to Marco's coiled energy. As he approached the table, his eyes, sharp and discerning, briefly met Tiana's. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a gesture of respect that Marco, in his entire life, had likely never offered a service worker. "Tanaka-san," Marco said, rising with a smile that was perfectly calibrated for warmth and respect. "It is an honor." "Bellamy-san," Tanaka replied, his voice a low, gravelly hum. He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for meeting me. The future of Etherian is of the utmost importance to us." "And to me," Marco assured him, gesturing for him to sit. "I see it not as an acquisition, but as a custodianship, a sacred trust." Tiana approached the table again. "Good afternoon, sir. May I offer you a drink?" she asked, addressing Mr. Tanaka. "Ah, yes, thank you," he said, turning his full attention to her. "I will have a hot green tea, please. Genmaicha, if you have it." "An excellent choice." "We do." "I'll bring it right away," Tiana said, with a small, genuine smile. Marco watched the exchange with a flicker of annoyance. The old man was wasting precious time on pleasantries with the help. He cleared his throat, eager to steer the conversation back to the only thing that mattered. "The schematics for the Series 9 core are breathtaking, Kenji," Marco began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "The way it leverages quantum entanglement for instantaneous data encryption. It's not just an evolution, it's a new genesis. Dr. Thorne is more than an engineer. She's a poet of the quantum realm." Tanaka's eyes twinkled with appreciation. "Thorne-sensei would be pleased to hear you say that. She believes the beauty of the design is as important as its function. She always says, 'True elegance is efficiency made manifest.'" As the two men began to delve into the technicalities and financial structures of the deal, Tiana moved in the background, a silent phantom ensuring their comfort. She brought Mr. Tanaka's tea, presenting it with a quiet grace that was part of her training, but also part of her nature. She refilled Marco's water glass without him ever seeming to notice. She was listening, of course. She couldn't help it. The talk of quantum mechanics and market capitalization was a world away from her reality of rent payments and bus schedules. But it fascinated her. Marco Bellamy spoke with a slick, practiced authority. But Tiana noticed something odd. He used all the right buzzwords: synergy, leveraging, paradigm shift. But when Tanaka posed a particularly deep, philosophical question about the ethical implications of Ethereum's technology, Marco deftly deflected, turning the conversation back to profit margins and market share. He knew the words, but he didn't seem to understand the music. Mr. Tanaka, she noted, saw it too. A subtle stillness would fall over the old man's features, a momentary shuttering of his expressive eyes, before he would nod and allow Marco to redirect the flow. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops and citrus foam. Marco barely registered it, eating mechanically while laying out his vision for Ethereum's global rollout. "We'll integrate it first into the Bellamy Defense Division," he said, tapping a fork on the table for emphasis. "The applications for military-grade encryption are limitless. Secure communications, autonomous drone coordination. The revenue streams are astronomical." Tanaka took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea. Dr. Thorne's vision was always centered on civilian applications: medicine, climate modeling, global education. Of course, Marco interrupted smoothly, and we will honor that. Phase 2. But the defense contracts will provide the capital to fund those humanitarian efforts on an unprecedented scale. We must be pragmatic. Tiana cleared their plates. As she reached for Marco's, her sleeve brushed against his water glass. The base was dewed with condensation, and the slight contact was enough to upset its delicate balance. A few drops of water, no more than a teaspoon's worth, spilled from the rim, landing on a stack of preliminary, non-essential paperwork Marco had placed beside his plate. It was nothing, a minor inconvenience, an insignificant event in a day of monumental consequence. But to Marco Bellamy, it was a flaw in the perfect performance, a smudge on the canvas of his conquest. His head snapped up, his eyes cold and grey as a winter storm, locking onto Tiana for the first time. The charming mask he wore for Tanaka dissolved, revealing the raw, predatory snarl beneath. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice a blade of ice in the warm, quiet restaurant. "Are you an idiot? Look what you did!" Tiana froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sir, I am so sorry. It was an accident." "An accident?" he scoffed, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "Incompetence is not an accident. It's a character flaw. This is Aurelia, not some roadside diner. You're paid to be perfect. Clearly they hired the wrong person." He flicked his gaze to the damp spot on the papers, a look of utter disgust on his face. "Get me your manager. Now." He turned back to Tiana, his lips curled in a sneer. "Some people are just too stupid to function." The word hung in the air. Stupid. It was common, brutal, a verbal cudgel, and in that moment, it was the most expensive word in the world. Across the table, Kenji Tanaka had not moved. His hands rested on the table, one on top of the other. His teacup sat, perfectly aligned with its saucer. But his face had become an impassive mask of granite. The warmth in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, profound stillness that was far more terrifying than Marco's open rage. He looked from Marco's contorted, angry face to Tiana's, who stood pale and mortified, yet with a strange, unshakable dignity in her posture. And in that deafening silence, the $3 billion deal for the future of technology silently and irrevocably died. The silence that followed Marco's outburst was a living thing. It was heavy, suffocating, and far more damning than any verbal rebuke could have been. The ambient clink of cutlery and murmured conversations from other tables seemed to recede, creating a vacuum around their booth. Marco, however, was too caught up in his own indignation to read the atmosphere correctly. He saw Tanaka's silence not as judgment, but as a pause, an intermission in the grand performance. He felt a surge of self-satisfaction, believing he had demonstrated that he was a man who demanded excellence, who would not tolerate incompetence at any level. This, he thought, was a sign of strength. He gave a short, humorless laugh and waved his hand as if brushing away a fly. "My apologies, Kenji. I cannot abide carelessness. It's the rust that corrodes the gears of progress." He leaned forward, attempting to recapture their earlier rapport. "Now, as I was saying about the logistical frameworks for Phase 1. He launched back into his monologue, but the spell was broken. The energy had irrevocably shifted. Kenji Tanaka remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Marco, but his gaze was different. It was no longer the engaged, curious look of a potential partner. It was the detached, analytical stare of an entomologist examining a particularly unpleasant specimen. "Bellamy-san," Tanaka said, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight that cut through Marco's spiel. "Tell me about your people." The question was so out of left field that Marco faltered. "My people? My executive team is the best in the world. David Chen in acquisitions, a killer. Maria Gonzalez in R&D, a certified genius." "No," Tanaka interrupted, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it was a slap in the face. "Not your executives. I mean the people who clean your offices, the men and women who serve your coffee, the security guard at your front gate. What are their names?" Marco stared at him, utterly baffled. The question was nonsensical, a trick question, a bizarre test of memory. I don't make it a point to memorize the names of the janitorial staff, Kenji. I am running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. My focus is on the macro level, on shareholder value, not on domestic details. "I see," Tanaka said, and the two words were a death knell. He picked up his teacup, took a slow sip, and placed it back on the saucer with a soft, final click. Dr. Thorne believes that a person's true character is not revealed in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those they believe to be beneath them. She says you can judge the health of a forest by observing how the tallest trees treat the smallest saplings. Do they hoard the sunlight, or do they allow enough to filter through for others to grow? A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Marco's consciousness. This wasn't about spilled water. This was something else. He had miscalculated, horribly. He tried to recover, to backtrack. That's a beautiful philosophy, and I assure you, Bellamy Industries has a very generous philanthropic arm. We donate millions to... Philanthropy is a transaction, Bellamy-san, Tanaka said, his voice still level, yet devastatingly sharp. Respect is a state of being. You cannot purchase it or delegate it to a foundation. At that moment, the manager of Aurelia, a harried-looking man named Jean-Pierre, scurried over to the table. "Mr. Bellamy, I am so terribly sorry for the disturbance. Is there a problem?" Before Marco could unleash his fury and demand Tiana be fired on the spot, Tanaka raised a hand. "There is no problem, Jean-Pierre. Your staff has been exemplary." He looked directly at Tiana, who was standing a few feet away, her face a mask of professional neutrality, though her eyes held a universe of turmoil. "Young lady, your poise under duress is commendable. Thank you for your excellent service." Tiana could only manage a small, shaky nod, her throat too tight for words. Tanaka then folded his napkin and placed it neatly on the table. He stood up. "Bellamy-san, I believe we have concluded our business here." Marco's mind reeled. "Concluded? We haven't even discussed the final terms, the third quarter projections." "The terms are no longer relevant," Tanaka said simply. He gave a slight, formal bow. "Thank you for the lunch." And with that, he turned and walked away, his small, stooped frame radiating an authority that Marco's towering physique could not hope to match. He left Marco sitting alone in the booth, the remnants of his seared scallops mocking him from the plate. The $3 billion deal had just walked out the door. For a full minute, Marco just sat there, the gears of his formidable intellect grinding, refusing to process the reality of what had just happened. It was impossible. No one walked away from Marco Bellamy. No one torpedoed a deal of this magnitude over a triviality. It had to be a negotiation tactic, a power play by the old man to squeeze out better terms. Yes, that was it. Tanaka was testing him. His confidence surging back, fueled by pure arrogance, Marco signaled furiously for the manager. "You, Jean-Pierre, get over here." Jean-Pierre, who had been hovering anxiously, rushed to his side. "Yes, Mr. Bellamy?" "That waitress," Marco snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "The clumsy one. More. I want her fired. Immediately. I don't care what it takes. I want her gone before I finish my dessert. A business of your caliber cannot afford to employ such incompetent, stupid people." Jean-Pierre paled. "Mr. Bellamy, Tiana is one of our best. It was a small mistake. It was not a mistake. It was a symptom of a larger disease called mediocrity, and I want it purged. Are we clear?" Marco's eyes were chips of ice. "If she is still employed here by the time I leave, I will make it my personal mission to ensure every one of my associates and competitors knows that Aurelia's standards have fallen into the gutter. I will ruin this place." The threat was not idle. Jean-Pierre knew it. A man like Marco Bellamy could crush a restaurant like Aurelia with a few well-placed phone calls. Swallowing hard, the manager nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand." As Jean-Pierre walked away to deliver the terrible news to Tiana, Marco leaned back in the booth. A cruel smile touched his lips. He would fix this. He would call Tanaka's office in an hour, apologize for the unfortunate interruption, and inform them that the source of the problem had been dealt with. It would show decisiveness. It would show that he, Marco Bellamy, was a man who solved problems. He was still in control. He was catastrophically wrong. He hadn't just lost control. He had detonated the bomb that would shatter his entire world. And he was still admiring the mushroom cloud, thinking it was a firework display in his honor. Marco let 2 hours pass, a calculated interval designed to project an aura of unruffled composure. He imagined Kenji Tanaka back in his penthouse office, regretting his theatrical exit, waiting for the inevitable call. Marco, magnanimous in victory, would be the one to extend the olive branch. He dialed the private number for Tanaka's executive chairman. It rang once before being answered, not by Tanaka, but by a crisp, formal female assistant. "Mr. Tanaka's office. This is Marco Bellamy for Kenji." "One moment, Mr. Bellamy." There was a brief pause, filled with the sterile silence of a corporate hold. Marco tapped his fingers impatiently on his glass-topped desk, his gaze sweeping over the city below. His city. The assistant returned. Her voice was now several degrees cooler. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bellamy. Mr. Tanaka is unavailable. He has asked me to forward you his official correspondence." "Correspondence? Put him on the phone," Marco demanded, his irritation flaring. "This is not a matter for assistance." "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. You will be receiving an email shortly. Thank you for your call." The line went dead. Marco stared at his phone in disbelief, a vein pulsing in his temple. The sheer audacity was staggering. Before he could fully process the insult, a notification chimed on his computer. An email had arrived from the office of Kenji Tanaka. Subject line, "Regarding the proposed acquisition of Ethereum." His heart hammered once, a hard, painful thud against his ribs. He clicked it open. The message was brutally, offensively brief. "Mr. Bellamy, Thank you for your presentation today. After careful consideration of your proposed custodianship of Aetherion, we have decided that our corporate philosophies are not in alignment. We will be pursuing other opportunities. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Kenji Tanaka, Executive Chairman, Thorn Holdings. Not in alignment, Marco whispered the words, his voice tight with incredulous rage. He read the email again, and then a third time, searching for some hidden meaning, some coded invitation to renegotiate. There was none. It was a block of granite. A door slammed shut and bolted from the other side. He exploded, with a roar of pure fury. He swept his arm across his desk. The phone, the monitor, a ridiculously expensive Newton's cradle, all of it went crashing to the floor in a symphony of shattering plastic and glass. His executive assistant, a young, perpetually terrified man named Arthur, appeared at the door, his face ashen. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Get out!" Marco bellowed, his face contorted. Arthur vanished instantly. Marco paced his office like a caged lion, the polished Italian marble cool beneath his feet, a stark contrast to the firestorm in his brain. This wasn't happening. It was illogical. $3 billion, the future of global technology, tossed aside because of a clumsy waitress and a sanctimonious old fool's bizarre obsession with character. He had been publicly, humiliatingly dismissed. The email was an insult, a declaration that he, Marco Bellamy, was not good enough. His rage began to cool, replaced by something far more dangerous, cold, methodical fury. He had been played. This wasn't about the waitress. That was just a pretext. There had to be another reason, a competing offer, corporate espionage, a betrayal from within his own ranks. He jabbed the intercom button, his voice now dangerously calm. "Arthur, get me Marcus Thorn in here, now." If Marco was a predator, an apex hunter, then Amanda Marcus was his jackal. She was the head of his corporate intelligence and risk mitigation division, a sterile title for a department that specialized in digging up dirt, exploiting weaknesses, and destroying threats before they could fully form. She was a small, severe woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a complete lack of discernible morals, which was precisely why Marco paid her a fortune. Marcus entered the office without a word, her gaze taking in the wreckage on the floor without comment. She stood before his desk, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting. "The Aetherion deal is dead," Marco said, his voice flat. "Tanaka just killed it. No explanation beyond philosophical differences." Marcus raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That seems inefficient." "It's a smoke screen," Marco spat. "I want to know the real reason. I want to know who else is bidding. I want to know what Tanaka had for breakfast. I want to know what pressure was applied to him and by whom. But most of all," he leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity, "I want everything you can find on Dr. Aris Thorn." This was the crux of the problem. Dr. Thorn was the power behind the throne, the true decision-maker. Tanaka was just a mouthpiece. To get the deal back on track, Marco needed leverage, and that meant finding a weapon he could use against the ghost in the machine. "Aris Thorn is a phantom, Marco," Marcus cautioned. "We've run preliminary searches before. There are no public photos later than her post-grad thesis publication 12 years ago. No social media, no property records under that name. All financial holdings are funneled through a labyrinth of shell corporations and blind trusts. She's a digital hermit." "Then dig deeper." Marco slammed his fist on the desk. "No one is a ghost. Everyone has a history. Everyone has a secret, a weakness, a family member, a past mistake, a hidden vice. Find me something I can use. I want to know who her parents were, who her first kiss was, what brand of toothpaste she uses. I want to know where she sleeps at night. I want you to strip her down to the bone. I am not losing this deal." Marcus gave a curt nod. "I'll need full authorization. Unlimited budget." "You have it," Marco said, waving a dismissive hand, "and put a team on Tanaka too. Full surveillance. I want to know who he's meeting with." "Consider it done." She turned to leave. "One more thing, Marcus," Marco added, a vicious glint in his eye. There was a waitress at Aurelia today. Tiana Moore. She was the catalyst for the disagreement. I had her fired. I want you to make sure she never works in a service position in this city again. Blacklist her. Make her life difficult. I want her to understand what happens when insignificant people get in my way. For the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps mild distaste, crossed Marcus's face. It was a petty, vindictive request, even for Marco. Punishing a waitress was swatting a fly with a sledgehammer. But her job wasn't to question, it was to execute. "Understood," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Tiana Moore, we'll handle it." As Marcus left, Marco felt a grim sense of satisfaction. He was back in his element. The chessboard had been upset, but now he was playing his own game, a game of shadows, secrets, and pain. He would uncover the truth. He would find Aris Thorne's pressure point, and he would squeeze until she had no choice but to give him what he wanted. He would reclaim Etherian, and he would make Kenji Tanaka and the ghost she represented pay for their insolence. The hunt was back on. The manager's office at Aurelia was small and airless, smelling faintly of stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaning products. Tiana Moore stood before Jean-Pierre's desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her spine ramrod straight. She had already unpinned the small silver nameplate from her uniform. "I am so sorry, Tiana," Jean-Pierre said, his eyes refusing to meet hers. He wrung his hands, a gesture of pathetic helplessness. Mr. Bellamy was very insistent. He threatened the restaurant. "I understand," Tiana said, and the shocking thing was, she did. She had seen the raw, ugly power Marco Bellamy wielded. Jean-Pierre was just a man with a mortgage and a family, caught in the blast radius of a billionaire's tantrum. "Do I get my final paycheck now?" The question was practical, devoid of the emotion churning inside her. Her mind was already calculating. She had $427 in her checking account. Rent was due in 10 days. Her mother's prescription copay was next week. The numbers spun in her head, cold and sharp. Of course," Jean-Pierre said, relieved to be on the solid ground of procedure. He handed her an envelope. "And your share of the tips from today." Tiana took the envelope, her face a polite, unreadable mask. "Thank you for the opportunity, Jean-Pierre." She turned and walked out of the office, through the bustling kitchen where the staff averted their eyes, and out the service entrance into the grimy alley behind the restaurant. Only when the heavy steel door clicked shut behind her did she allow her shoulders to slump. The curated atmosphere of Aurelia, with its hushed tones and dim lighting, was gone, replaced by the stench of garbage and the roar of city traffic. She leaned against the brick wall, the rough surface scratching her back, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Humiliation was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. Marco Bellamy hadn't just gotten her fired. He had stripped her of her dignity in front of her colleagues and a man she had, for a fleeting moment, admired. The word stupid echoed in her mind, a stupid word from a stupidly powerful man. But beneath the anger and the fear, there was a deeper, more profound sense of sorrow. It wasn't just about her job, it was about Etherian. Tiana Moore was not just a waitress. 5 years ago, She had been the star of MIT's quantum physics department, a prodigy on a fast track to a legendary career. Her thesis on multi-state quantum superposition was still cited by graduate students. She had lived and breathed the elegant, esoteric language of the universe. And no one's work had inspired her more than the mysterious Dr. Oris Thorne. Thorne wasn't just a scientist to Tiana, she was a visionary. Her papers were not just technical marvels, they were philosophical treatises on the potential of technology to solve humanity's greatest problems: disease, climate change, ignorance. Thorne wrote about a future where quantum computing could model cures for cancer, predict famines, and bring personalized education to every child on Earth. It was a beautiful, hopeful vision. Then Tiana's world had collapsed. Her mother, Helen, a gentlewoman who had raised her alone, was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive neurological disorder. The medical bills were astronomical, the required care all-consuming. Tiana had been forced to make an impossible choice: her future or her mother's present. She hadn't hesitated. She dropped out of MIT, moved back home, and took on a series of jobs to make ends meet, eventually landing at Aurelia, where the tips were good enough to keep their heads above water. She never stopped studying, though. Late at night, after her mother was asleep, she would devour scientific journals, run simulations on her aging laptop, and follow the progress of Ethereum with the passion of a devout follower tracking a new religion. She had been thrilled when she heard Bellamy Industries was a potential buyer, hoping its vast resources could bring Thorne's vision to life on a global scale. Now, she knew better. Hearing Marco Bellamy talk about Ethereum had been like listening to a tone-deaf brute attempt to play a Stradivarius. He saw only military contracts and revenue streams. He wanted to take Thorne's beautiful dream and turn it into a weapon, a tool of control, a bigger stick for the powerful to wield. The word he had used, custodianship, was a lie. He wanted ownership. He wanted to brand the future with his own ugly name. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her best friend, Liam, a freelance journalist who knew her whole story. Liam, how was your shift among the titans of industry? Tiana's fingers flew across the screen, the story pouring out of her in a torrent of text messages. The meeting, Marco Bellamy, Kenji Tanaka, the spilled water, the insult, getting fired. Liam called immediately. "Are you okay?" was the first thing he said. "I'll be fine," Tiana said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm just so disappointed." "In humanity?" "Yeah, I get that a lot," Liam quipped, trying to lighten the mood. "No, not just that," she said, pacing the alley. "Liam, he was going to buy Ethereum. He talked about using it for autonomous drone coordination. He wants to turn the most revolutionary technology in human history into a better way for rich countries to bully poor ones." "Classic Bellamy," Liam said grimly. "His whole empire is built on defense contracts. Did the other guy, Tanaka, buy into it?" "No," Tiana said slowly, replaying the scene in her mind. "That's the strange thing. He was quiet. He watched. He asked Bellamy what the names of his cleaning staff were. Bellamy had no idea, of course. Tanaka said something. Something about how the tallest trees treat the smallest saplings." Her breath hitched. "It was a test, Liam. The whole lunch was a character test." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "And Bellamy failed," Liam finished, his voice filled with a dawning awe. "That old man killed a $3 billion deal because Bellamy was an ass to a waitress." "I think so," Tiana whispered. "I think that's exactly what happened." The thought was staggering. It flew in the face of everything she had seen and experienced. In her world, men like Bellamy always won. They bulldozed their way through life, leaving a trail of broken people and broken rules, and they were always rewarded for it. But not today. Today, a quiet, dignified old man from Japan had drawn a line in the sand. He had chosen character over capital. A small, fierce spark of hope ignited in Tiana's chest, burning through the shame and the fear. Maybe Dr. Thorne's vision was safer than she thought. "I have to go, Liam," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "I need to get home to Mum." "Okay. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." "And Tiana?" "Yeah. Don't let that monster get to you. He's just a black hole in a $1,000 suit. You're a supernova." Tiana smiled for the first time since the water glass tipped. "Thanks, Liam." She ended the call and started the long walk to the bus stop. The fear about her finances was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But as she merged with the anonymous evening crowd, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had been a spectator in the story of Ethereum, a fan watching from the cheap seats. Today, for one brief, brutal moment, she had been on the playing field, and she had seen the soul of the man who wanted to own the future, and she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he was the wrong man for the job. For 3 days, Amanda Marcus and her team at Bellamy Industries' Corporate Intelligence Unit descended into the digital world, hunting for the ghost of Aris Thorne. They were the best in the business, modern-day shamans who could read the entrails of the internet, summoning secrets from the ether. But Aris Thorne was proving to be more than a ghost. She was a void. They tore through financial records, but every transaction was routed through the impenetrable legal fortress of Thorne Holdings in Geneva. They scraped academic databases, but her digital trail went cold the day she left her postdoctorate fellowship at Caltech. They bribed data brokers and deployed sophisticated tracking algorithms, but it was like trying to catch smoke in a net. There was nothing. No credit card purchases, no flight manifests, no utility bills, no property deeds. It was as if, 12 years ago, Aris Thorne had simply ceased to exist in any conventional, traceable way. Marcus sat in her sterile, white-walled office, a massive interactive screen displaying a web of dead ends. She was frustrated. It was a professional insult. Her entire career was built on the premise that everyone leaves a trace, everyone has a footprint. "She has to be spending money somewhere," she muttered to her lead analyst, a wiry hacker named Jago. "Even ghosts have to eat." "Not if someone else is buying the groceries," Jago countered, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "Every financial marker we've managed to isolate from Thorne Holdings is anonymized. We can see money moving, vast amounts of it, but it disappears into charitable foundations, anonymous endowments, and high-level medical trusts. It's the cleanest, most perfectly laundered money I've ever seen, except it's not being used for anything illegal. It's being used for good." He said the word as if it were a foreign concept. "Focus on the trusts," Marcus commanded. "Medical trusts. That's specific. That's a potential vulnerability. Find out who the beneficiaries are." For another 24 hours, they hammered at the digital walls of the medical trusts. Finally, Jago found a crack, a single, heavily encrypted, but imperfectly shielded trust based out of Switzerland, the HV Medical Discretionary Fund, using a quantum decryptor that was ironically a less ad-moored version of what Ethereum was developing. They managed to peel back one layer of the onion. The trust was paying for the complete, top-tier medical care of a single individual in the United States, a woman named Helen Moore. She was a patient at the exclusive, private Claremont Neurological Institute, receiving experimental treatments for a rare degenerative disease. The cost was astronomical, running into the millions per year. The name Moore snagged in Marcus's memory. She pulled up the file from Marco's petty side project. Tiana Moore, blacklist from service industry. The coincidence was too jarring to ignore. "Jago," Marcus said, her voice sharp with sudden focus. "Cross-reference Helen Moore. Find her next of kin." Jago's fingers danced. A few seconds later, he swore under his breath. "You're not going to believe this." He projected a new file onto the main screen. It was a simple public record, a birth certificate. Name, Tiana Moore. Mother, Helen Moore. Father, unknown. Marcus stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a series of sickening, brilliant snaps. The anonymous genius, the obsessive privacy, the waitress at the exact restaurant for the exact meeting, the astronomical medical trust for her mother. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a design. "It can't be," Jago whispered, his cynical hacker's facade crumbling in the face of the sheer impossibility. "The waitress is Aris Thorne." "No," Marcus said, her mind racing, connecting dots that were miles apart. "It's more perfect than that. It's a smoke screen inside a smoke screen." She started pacing, her mind on fire. Think about it. Aris Thorne vanishes 12 years ago. Why? To protect her work, her identity. She creates a legend, a ghost. But she still needs to live, to exist. So she creates a new identity, a simple one, a normal one. Tiana Moore, a girl who has to drop out of school to take care of her sick mother. It's the perfect cover story. It's humble, it's tragic, it's completely unremarkable. She stopped and turned to Jago. "And what better way to vet the person who wants to buy your life's work? You don't send a representative. You don't sit across from them in a boardroom. You serve them their water. You stand 10 feet away and watch them when their guard is down. You see who they really are." The full, horrifying, beautiful picture came into focus. Kenji Tanaka wasn't the chaperone for Dr. Thorne. He was the chaperone for Tiana Moore. The entire $3 billion negotiation, the months of due diligence, it all came down to a single, final test. A character test administered by a waitress in an exclusive restaurant. A test their boss had failed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Marcus felt a cold knot of dread mixed with a strange, unwilling admiration. It was the most audacious, high-stakes corporate maneuver she had ever witnessed. Now came the hardest part. Telling Marco. She found him in his office, staring out the window, brooding. He had been in a foul mood for days, lashing out at anyone who came near him. "What is it?" he snapped without turning around. "Did you find her?" "Yes," Marcus said, her voice carefully neutral. "We found Dr. Aris Thorne." Marco spun around, a triumphant, predatory gleam in his eyes. "Excellent. Where? Who is she? What's the leverage?" Marcus took a deep breath. There was no easy way to say this. "Marco, you met her 4 days ago, at Aurelia." Marco's face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about? There was no one else at the table." His voice trailed off as a flicker of impossible understanding began to dawn. He shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "Don't be ridiculous." "Her name is Tiana Moore," Marcus stated, laying the file down on his desk. "Aris Thorne is a persona, a legend she created 12 years ago to protect herself. Her real identity is Tiana Moore, the brilliant MIT prodigy who dropped out to take care of her mother, Helen. The same Helen whose multi-million-dollar medical bills are being paid for by an anonymous Swiss trust set up by Thorne Holdings. She wasn't a waitress who happened to be there, Marco. She was the entire reason you were there. The meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was an audition. Marco sank into his chair, the color draining from his face. He stared at the file, at the picture of the young woman he had insulted, the woman he had ordered Marcus to ruin, the woman whose quiet, melodic voice he had dismissed as irrelevant data. Are you an idiot? Some people are just too stupid to function. The words echoed back at him, no longer an expression of his power, but a testament to his own monumental, world-breaking blindness. The woman he had called stupid was a genius who held the future in her hands. The insignificant girl he had swatted away held all the power. He had not just lost a deal. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by the very person he sought to control. The foundation of his world, built on the belief that he was the smartest, most powerful man in any room, crumbled into dust. The revelation did not humble Marco Bellamy. It shattered him. For a full day, he was a storm contained within his office, oscillating between raw fury and a chilling emptiness. His identity, built on the foundation of being the smartest predator in any room, had been demolished. He had been a lab rat in an experiment he didn't even know he was in, dissected and dismissed by the very person he sought to conquer. By the second day, his rage coalesced into a desperate, arrogant strategy. The game wasn't over. He would go to her, not to apologize, a tool he viewed with contempt, but to force her to see reason. He would appeal to her intellect, demonstrating that his ruthless pragmatism was the only thing that could protect her idealistic vision from the brutal realities of the world. He would make her understand that rejecting him was, in her own language, inefficient. He found her in a place that was the antithesis of his entire existence, a quiet public library. Marcus's team had tracked her there, a ghost easily found once they knew who to look for. Marco walked in, his Tom Ford suit and aggressive energy sucking the air out of the peaceful room. He spotted her at a small table, bathed in the warm glow of a reading lamp. As his shadow fell over her, she looked up. There was no fear in her eyes, only a weary resignation. She had been expecting him. "Mr. Bellamy," she said, her voice as calm and clear as he remembered. She closed her book. "I'm surprised they let you in without a library card." The casual defiance stung. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low command as he pulled a chair and sat opposite her, invading her space. "I don't think we do," Tiana replied. "You had your chance. You spoke about military contracts and market dominance. The conversation was quite conclusive." "That was business," he dismissed impatiently. "This is about logic. You're a genius, Dr. Thorne. You must understand that your beautiful dream will be devoured by jackals without someone like me to protect it." Tiana leaned back, her gaze analytical, and for a chilling moment, Marco felt like the specimen under her microscope. "Your fundamental mistake, Mr. Bellamy, is that you see the world as a zero-sum game of predators and prey," she said, her voice soft but incisive. "You believe strength is the ability to intimidate and conquer. That's not strength. It's a shield for your own fear. You're terrified of Irrelamore, so you hoard power." "I am a pragmatist," he snarled, his voice rising enough to draw glares from nearby tables. "You are a vandal," she corrected him gently. "Ethereum's purpose is to solve complex problems, to model climate change, to design new medicines, to elevate humanity. You wanted to take it and build better cages, to create more efficient ways for people to kill one another. That isn't pragmatism. It's a profound failure of imagination." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, bypassing his anger and hitting the core of his identity. "You're a hypocrite," he shot back, desperate for an angle. "Sitting here in your moral ivory tower. What were you going to do with it? Let it wither in a lab? Everyone wants something. Power, money, legacy." "What I want," Tiana said, leaning forward, the steel in her spine becoming visible, "is a world with fewer problems. That is my legacy." She paused, letting the silence hang between them. "You called me stupid, Mr. Bellamy. Allow me to offer you a different definition. Stupid isn't spilling a glass of water. Stupid is having the resources to change the world for the better, and choosing to build a bigger bank account instead. Stupid is believing that belittling someone you see as powerless makes you strong. And the most monumental stupidity of all is to show someone your true, ugly character, and then think you can convince them you're someone else." She stood, gathering her books with a finality that left no room for argument. "The deal was never alive. Our meeting was just the final data point. Your results were, frankly, disappointing." Marco sat, utterly defeated. He had come armed for a battle of finance and logic, but she had waged war on a plane of character and vision, a territory where he had no weapons. He was speechless, a sensation so foreign it felt like suffocation. As she walked away, a stern-faced librarian approached him. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "if you can't respect the quiet of our library, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The indignity was absolute. Marco Bellamy, titan of industry, was being dismissed like a disruptive teenager. He rose, his face a mask of thunder, and stormed out, leaving only the faint scent of impotent fury in the quiet, hallowed air. News of the deal's collapse ripped through the financial world, solidified by a devastatingly polite statement from Thorn Holdings. They announced they were seeking a partner whose ethos aligned with Ethereum's mission of global humanitarian progress, a public declaration that Marco Bellamy was morally unfit. The market's reprisal was merciless. Bellamy Industries' stock plummeted as billions in capitalization evaporated overnight. Whispers of Marco's disastrous lunch meeting, expertly leaked by a self-preserving Marcus, cemented his new reputation, not as a ruthless genius, but a reckless liability. His board, facing a shareholder revolt, moved swiftly against him. A week later, Ethereum announced its new partner, Solace Analytics, a respected firm run by Dr. Evelyn Reed, a CEO celebrated for her work in ethical AI. The announcement marked the first public appearance of Dr. Aris Thorn in over a decade. At the press conference, Tiana Moore stood poised and in command. She didn't mention Marco, but her message was a clear repudiation of his entire philosophy. Ethereum was created to serve humanity, she stated, her voice steady. Our success won't be measured by our stock price, but by the number of lives we can improve. Our first project will be a free, open-source climate modeling platform to protect vulnerable nations. The world was enthralled. The story of the reclusive genius emerging with a plan to save the world was a narrative of hope, leaving Marco's story of greed in the dust. The fallout for Marco was absolute. Forced by his board to step down as CEO, he became an emperor in exile, stripped of power and Relamore. The company he built in his own image was now run by a committee that spoke of humility and responsibility, words he had always equated with weakness. He retreated from his world, an outcast haunted by his own failure. Months later, nursing a whiskey in a dim bar, he saw a news report on the television. It showcased the Ethereum Solace partnership's stunning successes. Doctors in developing nations diagnosing diseases in minutes, farmers using climate data to prevent famine. The reporter then interviewed Aris Thorn, who looked vibrant and fulfilled. Technology's true power isn't in domination, she said with a thoughtful smile, but in collaboration. It's a tool to help us understand the universe and each other better. Marco stared at the screen, at the face of the woman he had tried to ruin, who had so effortlessly ruined him. He remembered the venom with which he'd spat the word stupid. He finally understood. The stupid one wasn't the girl who served the water. It was the man who was too blind to see she was the source of the entire river. He finished his drink, the expensive liquor tasting like ash, and felt the crushing, absolute weight of his $3 billion mistake. So what is the ultimate lesson in the fall of Marco Bellamy? It's a stark reminder that true power isn't found in a bank account or a title, but in character. It's the story of how arrogance can build an empire of glass, and how one small stone of disrespect thrown at the wrong person can shatter the entire thing. Marco Bellamy saw the world as a hierarchy, and in his blindness, he failed to see that the person at the bottom was the one holding the entire structure up. This story proves that who you are when no one is watching, or when you think the person watching doesn't matter, is who you truly are. And sometimes, the universe is paying very close attention. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of dramatic twists and poetic justice. Thank you for listening.